Hi, welcome to our continuing series of Meet the Candidates. We are so lucky today to have Sondra Erickson in studio with us. Now, Sondra has been in the Minnesota House of Representatives before, and then she lost in the awful year for conservatives and for Republican candidates in 2008, and now she wants to go back again. And I think hearing the interview today, you are going to absolutely love what you hear. Welcome, Sondra.
Thank you, thank you. It's great to be here.
Tell us what happened. You were in the legislature for however long, and then you lost in that awful 2008, and now you want to go back. We need you.
I served from 1998 to 2008 for 10 years. Loved it. Represented my district, I think, very faithfully, but got caught up in not only a write-in on the Senate side, but also the Norm Coleman-Al Franken debacle. And who knows how many ballots weren't counted, whether or not there was voting by felons. I don't know, but in the end I lost by 87 votes. And so for 2 years I've sat back and watched the legislature, and I just saw our freedom and our liberty disappearing in this last 2 years. So I said to myself, after the people asked me to return, I have to do this.
And you are the Republican-endorsed candidate.
Republican-endorsed candidate.
You've been working so hard.
Yes, walking miles and miles and miles. By the end of the month, I will have knocked, with the help of one person, on every door in the district. Wow,
that is absolutely fabulous.
That's a lot of doors.
That is a lot of doors. But this is an important election, and I think everybody realizes that. What district are you in? What are the communities that you represent?
District 16A, the House District, is Princeton on the south end, Lake Mille Lacs on the north end, and then in between there's Foley and Malacca and Isle, Onamia, up to Hillman in Morrison County. Actually 4 counties, because on the south it's Baldwin Township in Sherburne County, which is actually my largest area, and then on the north end, as I said, it's Lake Mille Lacs. But then to the west, it's Morrison County, 7 wonderful townships there, and 6 great townships in Benton County and all of Mille Lacs County. So it's, a great area.
As you're outdoor knocking, you're hearing a lot of talk about jobs in the economy and a lot of talk about education. But when you opened up, you started with voter fraud. And I want people to understand that there is voter fraud in the state of Minnesota, whether it's convicted felons voting. Wisconsin and Minnesota have a joint investigation going on now for people looking into people who voted in both Minnesota and Wisconsin. I don't want anybody to think there is no election fraud in Minnesota. Are you a proponent of photo ID?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was a co-author when I served in the legislature, worked very closely with Dan Severson, who's now seeking the Secretary of State position. I argued several times on the House floor for photo ID, and it is an absolute must. It is a common sense. And my approach is straightforward common sense in this election cycle, which it's always been, but photo ID is essential.
Mark Ritchie came out and said photo ID was a problem, or a solution in search of a problem. I mean, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of, but a photo ID would, at the polls, would be a wonderful asset.
It's necessary. In this day and age, when photo ID is required for everything, why not at the ballot box as well?
Exactly. All right, so you're out and about in your community, you're talking about face-to-face to all the voters out there, and jobs in the economy have to be the #1 issue. Let's start with the budget. We're looking at an enormous deficit. We keep hearing the state of Minnesota is broke. Now, in my opinion, if the state of Minnesota, 5 million people, is generating $33 billion in revenue, that's not broke to me. But the legislature continues to want to spend more than that. What are we going to do about the budget?
Well, first of all, we have to freeze spending. And my approach would be pass the tax bill first, because the tax bill is that which controls any kind of spending. And we lock in some tax reductions. We take a look at all of the exemptions that are in place, and there are a slew of them. We take a look at how our tax code affects small business as well as corporations. Maybe we reduce the corporate tax, but we do things that are going to stimulate the voters, stimulate the citizens, because stimulus shouldn't come from the top down, it should come from the bottom up. So when taxpayers have more money to spend, then they're going to stimulate the economy. So let's pass the tax bill and then follow that with a way to stop spending, just freeze it. And then we can have our really serious debate about where we can hone in on reductions and really look at what the Constitution asks us to do and not go beyond that.
Think back to last legislative session. Do you remember what they opened the session with? A bonding bill, $1 billion bonding bill. What do you think of bonding bills?
Well, bonding bills should be in the second year of the biennium, for one. That's been the tradition, and that's the way it should be, because the budget has to be set, and then bonding is extra, because that's borrowing. And we have to know what our rating is, and we have to know what's essential and what is a want. And I think back to 1998 when I first served, and my big speech on the floor of the House as we were voting on the bonding bill was a speech about what in the world are we doing with bonding when we have all these earmarks in a bill that I thought was money borrowed for that which the state needs to maintain, for our buildings and for roads and bridges, which are so essential to our infrastructure. So I gave this long speech, and my colleagues were pretty proud of me, but I noticed that the other side of the aisle thought maybe I'd lost it.
Trust me, you hadn't lost it. More Minnesotans think along those lines than along the borrowing. What I think people don't understand about the bonding bill is not only do we have to pay that back, but we have to pay it back with interest as well. It's the out-of-control spending is crazy. Let's think about some of the things that were in the bonding bill. It was the Sheet Music Museum. It was the zoo. Do you really think those are a fiscal priority for the state of Minnesota right now?
Well, of course they're not. We have to be really serious, Sue, about what is required of us as elected officials to be responsible to our voters and to be responsible for the state infrastructure, because I think it's clear that state infrastructure is the center of a bonding bill, and gorilla cages and sheet music museums are nice, but they are not essential to our infrastructure. They're not essential to a solid constituency understanding why we borrow money, because they're not going out to borrow money, I don't think, for the fun things. At least I never did, and I think that most folks in District 16A borrow money for homes, for businesses, maybe for cars, but they're not spending money that they don't have or borrowing for that which they know is not essential.
Excellent. It sounds like you'll have the budget reined in and nothing flat. What about jobs? Let's talk about jobs. Now, you know as well as I do, the #1 employer in the state is the government. What are we going to do about jobs? What is government's role in providing jobs?
Government doesn't have, in my estimation, a direct role in providing jobs, because government doesn't create wealth. That's created in the private sector. Mille Lacs County, one of the 4 counties in 16A, has the second highest unemployment rate in the state. And we desperately need jobs in the private sector. And 2 years ago, in one of my final forums, I noted that what I thought was ahead was a huge unemployment, because government was growing, the private sector was not. So we have to have tax policy that favors private sector job growth, and I think it has to be a joining together of all local units of government, whether it's school board members, city council members, county commissioners, township officials, and then the state elected officials. We all have to work together to find those entrepreneurs and those innovators to create the jobs. I know I have former high school graduates from Princeton High School, where I taught for over 30 years, who would probably love to come back to Mille Lacs County and create a small business. But we have to have a climate that's good for that.
And what do you think Minnesota can do to make the business climate more friendly to small businesses? Do you think the taxes is one of the top issues?
Absolutely, taxes are one of the top issues. Either get rid of the corporate tax so we're competitive with South Dakota. I'm from North Dakota, and my goodness, they're just growing by leaps and bounds. Of course, they have the oil industry, but still, they don't have all these expenditures like we do at the state government level. They limit government, which has to be, I think, one of the main reasons that we all go to St. Paul to create jobs is government has to be limited, regulations and mandates have to be reduced, and let the free market work. Let the free market work, because the free market will dictate where we need jobs. And I know we have smart people out there who want to create jobs.
Last legislative session, we had, they introduced a fourth tier income tax. Would you have supported a fourth tier income tax for the people of Minnesota?
Oh, absolutely not. No fourth tier, and more than that, reduce the tax rate so that, as I said earlier, we have more money in our pockets to spend, which is something that I promoted 2 years ago. I was a little ahead of my time, but I was right on target. And that's what we need to do. So the fourth tier will just hurt, especially small business, because they roll together their personal and their job income, their industry income, for example, and that's going to hurt them. So no fourth tier. I will not support tax increases, especially at this time when we need to let people have more of their own money to invest and to save.
Do you think taxes would be the #1 issue to take a look at?
Well, that's why the tax bill should be first. And I always argued that with Speaker Swigum when we were arranging the order of our bills. And I asked frequently in caucus, why don't we have the tax bill first? Because what we do at home and what counties and cities have to do is set their levy, and then they set their budget. And so why aren't we setting the tax, or enacting the tax bill first? And that will then, I hope, limit our spending, because we're not going to raise taxes, at least not under my leadership, and we're not going to go out on paths where we have extra taxes. And fees have to be included too. There's a surreptitious thing that goes on in the legislature where you can sneak in a fee increase and think that nobody's going to notice it. And suddenly we are spending more and more and more and more because we have fees coming in. I think that gubernatorial candidate Emmer many times has mentioned the state budget is actually $60 billion over the biennium when you consider grants and fees and the federal dollars that come in. Well, my goodness, that needs to be frozen right there, or reduced, as I said, after we pass a tax bill. So let's get on with getting taxes reduced.
There was a bill introduced last year about school levies, saying that, oh, it's okay, if you have a levy, go ahead and extend it. You don't need to ask the voters' approval. Would you have voted for that?
No, of course not, because the people are in charge. We, the people, need to be the leaders. In the future, we should have been in the past, but I think we were asleep at the switch, and so government took over. And some leaders in the legislature think it's okay to have these tax increases without voter approval, but that can't happen. It shouldn't happen in any respect. At a recent forum, I talked about North Star Commuter Rail being in debt, deficit spending, and said, the free markets should work. We should have fees at the gate of the North Star Commuter Rail that really show us whether the demand is there. But more than that, why are we deficit spending? And the question was, should we allow a local option sales tax for a county? In this case, it was Sherburne. And I said, absolutely not. And if that's what happens, it's got to be with voter approval. You just can't let those happen without the people weighing in.
Exactly. It is all about we the people. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot of this election.